Right now, somewhere deep in the jungles of Malaysia, workers are laying the final sections of a railway that most of the world has never heard of. Not because it is small, because it is enormous. And because what it is about to do to global trade, to regional power, and to the balance of influence across an entire continent is something that nobody is talking about loudly enough. This is the East Coast Rail Link, a project that was canceled, resurrected, nearly bankrupted a government, renegotiated from the very edge of collapse, and is now 85% complete. When the first train runs on this line, which will happen within months of this video, Southeast Asia will never move the same way again. Here is everything you need to know. The East Coast Rail Link, or ECRL, connects two coastlines that have never been directly linked before. On one side, Port Klang, on the west coast, Malaysia's busiest port, sitting on the Strait of Malacca, one of the most important shipping lanes on the entire planet. On the other side, Kota Bharu in the northeastern state of Kelantan, facing the South China Sea. Two oceans, one railway, 665 kilometers of steel. And here's what that distance means for real people. Today, driving from Kota Bharu to Kuala Lumpur takes 7 to 8 hours. On this railway, that same journey takes 4 hours, half the time. For the communities on Malaysia's east coast, which has always been treated as the forgotten side of the country, that is not a small thing. That is a generational shift. But passengers are not the main reason this railway was built. Freight is, and the freight story is where everything changes. But before we get to that, here is where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. August 2017, Prime Minister Najib Razak signs the ECRL contract. The cost, approximately $16 billion at the exchange rate at the time of signing, financed almost entirely through loans from China's Export-Import Bank. Then May 2018 happened. Najib Razak lost the election, one of the most shocking political upsets in Malaysian history. And the new government, led by Mahathir Mohamad, looked at the ECRL contract and did not like what it saw. Mahathir's words were not diplomatic. He called the deal direct, quote, an unjustified, hefty lump sum price, which lacked clarity in terms of technical specifications, price, and, by extension, economic justification. Construction stopped, July 2018. Think about what that moment looked like on the ground. Thousands of workers, hundreds of kilometers of partially built railway, billions of dollars already poured into the earth, machines sitting still. And nobody knew if any of it would ever be finished. There were serious questions being asked. Had the deal been deliberately inflated to funnel money toward Malaysia's 1MDB scandal, one of the largest financial frauds in history? For 9 months, nobody had the answer. Then April 2019, Malaysia and China reached a new deal. The cost per kilometer dropped by nearly 1/3. More work was guaranteed to local Malaysian contractors. And construction resumed. Malaysia went into that negotiation as the smaller party, a country of 33 million people sitting across the table from 1.4 billion. It came out with better terms. That matters more than most people realize, and we are going to come back to exactly why. Building anything through the terrain of peninsular Malaysia is hard. Building a 665-kilometer electrified double-track railway through it is something else entirely. The route cuts through dense tropical rainforest, mountain ranges that rise sharply from the jungle floor, ground conditions that shift without warning underneath your feet. To get through it, engineers drilled 41 tunnels. And at the center of those tunnels sits something that has never existed anywhere in Southeast Asia before. The Genting Tunnel, 4 kilometers long, the longest railway tunnel ever built in this entire region. Think about what 4 kilometers of tunnel through a mountain actually means. It is the length of 40 football fields, end to end, through solid rock, underground. To drill it, the team brought in Malaysia's largest ever tunnel boring machine, a custom-engineered piece of equipment built specifically for the rock conditions inside the Malaysian highlands. The project also completed Malaysia's first ever 500-meter welded rail sections, a technical record that had never been achieved on Malaysian soil before this project began. Bridges over rivers, cuttings through mountain faces, embankments across wetlands stretching further than most people will ever walk in a single day. the most concentrated engineering effort in Malaysia's history. And it almost never happened, which you already know. But here is what you do not yet know. The reason China agreed to lose a third of its profit rather than walk away from this project entirely. So why did China accept worse terms rather than walk away from the table entirely? Because Malaysia is not replaceable. The Strait of Malacca, the narrow channel between Malaysia's west coast and Indonesia, carries roughly 40% of all global trade every single year. 1 in 3 barrels of oil shipped anywhere in the world passes through it. China's Belt and Road Initiative, its multi-trillion-dollar strategy to build infrastructure connections across Asia, Africa, and Europe, needs Malaysia inside that network. Losing this project would have been a visible, public failure at the worst possible time. So China renegotiated, not out of generosity, out of necessity. And what this railway now unlocks for trade is the reason why every major shipping company in the world should be paying close attention. Here is the problem with moving cargo across Asia right now. If you want to ship goods from China to the Middle East or Europe, your freight travels by sea, down through the South China Sea, past Singapore, through the Strait of Malacca, and out into the Indian Ocean. That route around the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula adds days to every shipment, days that cost money, days that slow down supply chains the modern world depends on. The ECRL removes that detour completely. Goods arrive at Kuantan Port on Malaysia's east coast facing the South China Sea. They transfer to freight trains. In a matter of hours, they cross the entire peninsula and arrive at Port Klang on the west coast, ready to continue into the Indian Ocean. Now here is where the numbers become genuinely staggering. Transit time drops from 7 to 10 days by sea to 3 to 5 days overland. That is not an improvement. That is a completely different category of logistics. Freight costs fall by up to 20%. Malaysia's investment minister has confirmed the ECRL cuts cargo movement between the two coasts by 2.5 full days on its own. To make that 20% feel real, if a company was spending $10 million a year moving freight through this corridor, the ECRL saves them $2 million every year, without changing anything else about how they operate. That saving compounds year after year after year. This is what economists call a land bridge. Malaysia stops being a country that ships pass by. It becomes a country that the world's supply chains run through. And the communities sitting along this railway corridor, many of them in states that have been among the most overlooked in Malaysia for decades, are about to find themselves on one of the most important trade routes in Asia. The ECRL is expected to add 3.8% to Malaysia's GDP by 2047. During construction alone, it has already created over 80,000 jobs. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the entire working population of a mid-sized city, all employed because of a single railway line. Here is what most coverage of this railway completely misses. The ECRL is not a Malaysian story. It is a continental one. Right now, a network is being assembled across Southeast Asia, one country at a time, one section at a time. And Malaysia is the missing piece that makes the whole thing work. The Laos-China Railway opened in December 2021. Almost overnight, it transformed Laos, a country that had almost no modern rail infrastructure connecting it directly to China's southern trade networks and to the markets flowing south from there. Thailand is advancing its own high-speed connections northward toward the Laos border. And Malaysia, with the ECRL, is closing the next gap in the chain. Malaysia is already in active discussions about extending the ECRL north to the Thai border. One connection. That is all it would take to snap the Malaysian and Thai networks together and bring an unbroken rail corridor from southern China all the way to Singapore, one major step closer to reality. When that network is finished, and I said when, not if, it will be the most significant transformation of overland trade in Asia since the ancient Silk Road. Think about what that actually means. Goods from factories in southern China, moving by rail through Laos, Thailand, and Malaysia, arriving in Singapore in days instead of weeks. Tourists crossing borders that once required 3 separate flights, now sitting on a single train. Communities that have spent generations cut off from major economies, suddenly finding themselves on a global trade corridor. Countries that were landlocked becoming land-linked. The ECRL is not a railway that happens to cross Malaysia. It is the piece that completes a puzzle the entire continent has been building toward for decades. So here is where I want to be straight with you. The steel is in the ground, the tunnels are drilled, the tracks are being laid. This railway is going to run. And when it does, something that cannot be undone begins. Villages that have spent generations on the margins of Malaysia's economy will find themselves connected to global trade. Ports that nobody talked about will become names that every major shipping company knows by heart. The balance of economic influence across Southeast Asia will shift quietly, permanently, and faster than most people expect. China will have proven that it can build the infrastructure that the region's governments actually need, and that it can absorb a loss in negotiation and still come back to the table. Malaysia will have demonstrated something that smaller nations rarely get to demonstrate: that you can face a great power, demand better terms, and win. But here is the question that genuinely divides serious people, and I want to know where you land on this. Some people look at what China is building across Southeast Asia, railway after railway, port after port, loan after loan, and they see development, real infrastructure, real jobs, real connections between communities that were previously invisible to the global economy. Other people look at the exact same projects and see something different: a slow, deliberate strategy to make entire regions financially and politically dependent on Beijing. A strategy so patient and so well-funded that the countries inside it will spend decades working out what it actually costs. Both sides have real arguments, and the answer is not obvious. So which side are you on? Drop your answer in the comments. Because this is one of those conversations where the debate itself matters as much as the facts. And if this video showed you something about Southeast Asia that you did not see before, share it with one person who should be watching what is being built in this part of the world right now. Because what gets built here in the next 5 years will shape this region for the next 100.